Dipa, Chapter 8, Love Bowing to Love. Quote, your heart knows everything. In a busy Santa Fe coffee house one morning, Sharon Salzberg was asked, what was Dipa's greatest gift to you? Sharon paused for a moment, and her face softened. Dipa really loved me, she said, and when she died, I wondered, will anyone ever really love me like that again? She fell silent, and for a few moments it was as if a gate had opened into another world. In this other place there was only one thing, complete and total love. Of course, Sharon added with a quiet smile, it wasn't just me. It wasn't personal. Jacqueline Mandel once asked Dipa whether she would be practicing mindfulness or loving kindness. Dipa answered, from my own experience, there is no difference between mindfulness and loving kindness. For her, love and awareness were one. Think about it. When you are fully loving, aren't you also mindful? When you are fully mindful, is this not also the essence of love? Joseph Goldstein recalls that once he saw Dipa bow to the Buddha. It was so clear, and that there was no one there. It was just love bowing to love. Another student said, to Dipa, enlightenment was great love. Her teachings were about connecting to others and being kind. Her heart, like the door to her apartment, was always open. And in that great heart, everyone, whether in sorrow or in celebration, could come and go and be held in her loving embrace. A Sufi teacher, Asha Greer, described being hugged by Dipa so thoroughly that my 6 feet fit into her great vast empty heart, with room for the whole of creation. End quote. Blessing for a Thief by Stephen Schwartz. Quote, for a couple of years, it seemed that whenever I visited New York City, my car would get broken into and my radio ripped off. I'd been invited to a friend's wedding in Queens. I told Dipa that I was thinking of taking the train because my radio always gets stolen. Don't be silly, she said, go by car. So we ended up taking the car, which by that time had a security system installed on it. We parked the car and went to the wedding. When we came out, sure enough, my car had been broken into yet again. This time, they took not only the radio, but all my tapes, too. When we got back, I walked into the house, and Dipa asked, how was the wedding? The wedding was great, I said, but my car got broken into again, and the radio was stolen. I'm really upset. Dipa just burst out laughing. What's so funny? You must have been a thief in your former lifetime. How many more times do you think you will need to have your radio stolen? You tell me, I demanded. How many more times? Tell me so I can be prepared. Ignoring my question, she asked, what did you do? What was your reaction when the car was broken into? I was really angry because it's happened so many times, and I thought I had a security system. She looked at me in amazement. You mean you didn't even think about the man who took your radio? How sad his life must be? She closed her eyes and started chanting quietly to herself, and I knew she was saying metta, loving kindness blessings, for the thief. It was a wonderful lesson for me. End quote. Another Person to Love by Jack Cornfield. Quote, she was very loving and very grandmotherly. When you would come in, especially in India, her first questions were, how are you feeling? How is your health? Are you eating well? Are you doing okay with our climate and food? And so forth. She would smile when people walked in the room, and there was this outpouring of welcoming, loving kindness. It didn't matter who came in or what circumstances, or what they had to say. That level was irrelevant to her. What was important was simply that here was another person to be loved. End quote. I Have a Gift for You Too by Stephen Schwartz. Quote, on my first trip to India, my friend Sharon Salzberg accompanied me and shared some of her favorite experiences with me. In Benares, there was a particular sweet that she wanted me to try called rasmali. It was delicious. Back in Calcutta, we went to see Dipa, who asked me, what was your favorite thing in India? I imagine the right answer would have been something like, I prayed in a temple in Bodh Gaya, or I saw a wonderful picture of the Buddha, or I went on retreat. But instead I blurted out the first thing that came into my head, which was, I had these sweets in Benares, and they were so good. Sharon gave me a look, and I wondered how Dipa Ma felt about my answer. Later, leaving Calcutta, we stopped by her house to pay respects on our way to the airport. We bowed and offered her a gift. "I have a gift for you too," she said, setting some rasmali sweets before us. She had sent a friend of Dipa's searching all over Calcutta to find the sweet I had tasted in Benares. I was so moved by this act of giving me anything I wanted, whatever it was. If I said I enjoyed it, she would feed that part of me. End quote. Loving Kindness for Your Mother by Jack Cornfield. Quote, I met a man who had practiced in India in the late 60s and early 70s. He was an avid meditator. He shaved his head, he wore white, he spent years in temples and ashrams and monasteries. His parents hated it. He was probably in his early 30s at the time, and his parents thought he should be in medical school or law school. His mother was particularly unhappy. It was as if he had died, as if she had lost a son. Whenever he went to see Dipa Ma, she would ask him about his mother. How is your mother doing? How is she doing? When you do your sittings, are you doing metta for your mother? Every time you sit, you should put your mother in your heart and send her loving kindness. One time, she reached under the mattress in her back room and pulled out a roll of Indian banknotes. She took out a 100-rupee note, worth about $12, which was a lot of money for her. She put it in his hand, closed his fingers over it, and said, "Go buy a present and send it to your mother." That was how she taught. End quote. Strokes for All by Stephen Schwartz. Quote, when Dipa Ma first got to our New England house, she and Rishi were nervous about the dog. She had never lived in a house where the dog stayed inside. Dogs in her Calcutta neighborhood were generally unhealthy, so having dogs in the house just didn't make sense. Over a couple of weeks, though, this wonderful transformation happened between her and the dog. Dog was the first English word that she learned. Every morning she would come downstairs and say in halting English, "Dog, where is dog?" And our dog Yates would come running over, and she would get down on her knees and stroke him with loving kindness, just like she stroked me and the other meditators. Yates really appreciated this. It was very beautiful to watch the two of them connect, in part because she was nervous at the outset. You could see that there was this conditioning that was part of her culture. But she just took him into her heart, and they became great friends. The day she left, she went over to Yates and got down and talked to him and gave him a special loving-kindness prayer. End quote. Angarika Teddy by Buzz Busowitz. Quote, while Dipa Ma was at IMS in 1984, I spotted a big teddy bear sitting atop the trash to be picked up in the neighborhood. I rescued it and gave it to Dipa Ma's grandson Rishi, who was also here with his mom. We named the bear Anagarika Teddy. One meaning for Anagarika is literally the homeless one. When Dipa and family left IMS, Teddy remained in my care, and I more or less forgot about him. A couple of years later, I went to India and visited Dipa Ma in Calcutta. When she saw me, she immediately asked, "How is Anagarika Teddy?" She had not forgotten even a teddy bear saved from the trash. I was taken aback. It made me realize how much she must also care for living, breathing beings like myself. It revealed to me a clarity of her mind as well. End quote. When the Heart is Not Afraid by Sharda Rajal. Quote, when Dipa Ma was about to leave the Insight Meditation Society, a whole group of us, 20 or so, were standing near her, holding our hands together at our hearts. For some reason, just before she got in the van, she turned to me and put her hands on my hands, looked me right in the eye, remarkably close, and held my hands in silence. She stared at me with utter love, utter emptiness, utter care. During this minute, she gave me a complete, heartfelt transmission of loving kindness. There was Shakti, spiritual energy, just pouring from her. Then she turned around and slowly got into the car. In this one moment, she showed me a kind of love I had never experienced before. It was a rare kind of love without separation or differences. This was my first taste of what can happen in the presence of an enlightened being. That moment is just as powerful as if it had happened yesterday. Knowing this love and seeing that it's possible to give it to others has been a real inspiration for me on my path. Dipa Ma is an example of how, when the heart is not afraid, the love can just pour through. End quote. This Life is in Trouble by Wendy Palmer. Quote, there was a period in my life when I was deeply unhappy. My marriage was on the rocks, and I was ashamed of my lack of patience as a mother. Ironically, it was a time when, to the outside world, my life looked fine and successful. I should have been happy. I was talking to Jack Cornfield about my struggle. He mentioned that there was a wonderful woman teacher he had met in India who was visiting nearby at Sylvia Boorstein's house. When I arrived at Sylvia's, I was shown up to the attic room. Dipa Ma was seated on a zafu, and her translator was sitting to her left. I began to settle myself on the cushion in front of her. Before I could even drop into a position of stillness, she turned to the interpreter and said something in Bengali. He said to me, she says, don't even bother to do Vipassana right now. Do only metta, loving kindness. I was startled. We hadn't greeted each other, and usually the student asks a question before the teacher responds. Why? I asked. Again, she said something in Bengali, and the interpreter translated, this life is in trouble, and you need to work on it now, so do only metta. He then motioned that the interview was at an end. I was stunned. The entire interaction had taken less than 2 minutes. I knew that the term this life meant my feelings towards myself. Clearly she had seen my unhappiness, and the antidote she had prescribed was loving kindness. My meeting with Dipa Ma inspired me, and even though I found it quite difficult, I worked with the metta, reciting the phrases inwardly many times a day and throughout my sitting practice. At first, I couldn't feel a positive response, but I continued. It took about 3 months before I could begin to feel some genuine warmth towards myself. At the end of 6 months, I could feel a definite shift in myself when I would bring my attention to the practice. I could feel more softness, openness, and even affection. Somehow Dipa Ma had found just the right way to wake me up, give me a tool to change my thinking pattern, and create a major shift in my life. End quote, and end of chapter 8.